Hi, everybody, to whoever's watching. Thank you so much for joining me. It's Monday. It is 6 o'clock on the dot, going live at 6. I always tend to go live when I have a special guest, and I do have a very special guest standing by. I'm going to introduce her and bring her in 1 second. It's Frances Widdowson. Don't go anywhere. I'll wait just a couple of minutes for people to come along. In the meantime, if you're new to my channel, I used to work for Global News. And then I got fired when I started to question the COVID narrative, which, the media can lie. Just know this. Just because you hear something on the news, don't take it to be as face value. There's lots of systems behind what goes on the news. There's lots of systems behind the content that they create, the newscasts that they output. So don't always take what they say as gospel. But in the meantime, while people jump on, I'm going to play you this intro from my friend, Jimmy Dore. He's coming to town. He's coming to New West on Sunday. So if you don't have tickets, get tickets. Here we go.
Like my friend Anita Krishna in Canada, she worked for a Global News or a big news network. She started to ask just regular questions. She's like, isn't that what we're supposed to be doing? We're a news organization. Isn't that what we do as a news organization? And she got fired for that, of course.
Crazy.
Of course I did. I think you're nobody. You're not somebody until you've been fired. And my guest that's standing by has also been fired. So we'll talk to her about that. But the person that made this documentary, I want to just we're going to talk about him a lot, but his name is Simon Hergott. He used to work for Global as a camera operator. He worked there for 10 years and he also got fired. So if you speak up and out against a narrative, it's the end of you. These institutions, they try to end you unceremoniously, like as if you're garbage, like as if what you have to say isn't true. And there are some things you just can't speak about. Like some things are completely verboten. You cannot say anything bad about vaccines. You can't say anything bad about certain religions. You can't say anything. You can't question anything. And God forbid you question maybe what might have happened at a residential school. God forbid you are someone that has some history, that has some background, that has some knowledge, that has something to say and can offer insight, that you've studied that you have a perspective. God forbid you say the wrong thing. They'll make it almost illegal and throw you in jail if you question certain narratives. So we're going to get into all that. The camera guy that made the video, the documentary, What Remains, his name is Simon. My guest is Frances Widdowson. And before we bring her in, I want to show you this clip.
The people of Canada need to understand what is happening in Powell River and why.
The announcement that the remains of 215 children had been found in the old apple orchard next to the Kamloops Indian Residential School had a profound impact on Canada and the world. The town of Powell River was no exception, as the revelation prompted the demand by the Tla'amin Nation to change the town's name. Here in this coastal community, what is perceived as just a minor change has much more significant implications because it gets to the heart of the ability to believe true things. Furthermore, the unmarked grave story has been used as a weapon to fast-track the integration of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, UNDRIP, into the Canadian legal system, which has the potential to undermine the rule of law and democratic processes more generally.
Wow, great clip. Let's waste no more time. Let's bring her in. Frances Widdowson, hello. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me on.
Great. Well, it's the second time I've seen you. I saw you recently when you got an award. That
Yes.
was lovely. Did you have a good time that evening?
I had an excellent time.
You actually got an award instead of getting bullied and getting accosted or people have been quite nasty.
Yeah, this is the nature of the beast this time around. So, you know, one shouldn't take these things personally. It's important not to take things personally. See yourself as a symbol that people are fighting against, and act accordingly.
Wow. Okay, so in a nutshell, I mean, you are a professor. You were fired from Mont Royal University. You're a doctor too. I should address you properly. And what did you, before we get into the topic of today's show, what did you get fired for?
I got fired for satirizing the mob that was trying to get me fired. So what happened was a professor, an Indigenous scholar activist by the name of Gabrielle Lindstrom, who now goes by the name, her maiden name, Gabrielle Weaselhead.
What? Oh, sorry. Okay.
She was upset about me criticizing indigenization. And so she started to instigate a mob initiated by a student. It was an anonymous Twitter account, supposedly a student-led group. She was trying to encourage this student group to try to get me fired. And while she was doing this, she was implying that it was important to be loving and kind and to try to bring people together with humility and grace. And so I found this hard to take seriously, this kind of hypocrisy. And so I started to satirize her attempts to get me fired. And this enraged her and her supporters. And as a result of this, we entered into this long Twitter exchange. And Mount Royal University, instead of protecting me from this mob, it found me guilty of harassment and creating a toxic work environment.
Oh, please.
Yeah.
Please. Yeah. They'll come up with anything. They'll just say anything and stick to it, and off you go, and then you have a battle on your hands. Well, that's not fair. And I know, give us an update on the outcome of that. You know, I know you're going to the Labor Relations Board later and what have you. I'm doing the same thing. It's like swimming upstream.
Yes.
But it is nice to stick it to them if you can.
Well, you have to, you should always follow these processes through to the end. Not because you expect a great result, but because you want all these authorities and decision makers to justify their actions. And then you can, at the end of it, do an assessment of how the institutions have been destroyed. And that's what I'm hoping to do. I'm hoping to go to the Supreme Court of Canada on this one, so that we can get the courts to, write down why they think this was appropriate to push out, a truth-telling professor out of an institution instead of standing up to all these activists who are destroying the institution.
Absolutely. Well, I wish you all the best with that. If there's anyone that can fight that battle, it's you.
Yep.
Okay, tell me a little bit. I started to read a little bit before I watched the documentary, What Remains. I started to read just a little smidgen of Disrobing the Aboriginal Industry, the deception behind Indigenous cultural preservation. Now, even just in the beginning, I talked about things that are verboten. It is verboten to even say this, isn't it? Like to use terms like this is very triggering to people. They get very upset that you could say this, but you strike me as a woman who just kind of cuts through things and just sees the the practicality of the situation. You're kind of like, what are we doing here? So I was going to start with your backstory in the beginning of this piece that you talk about going up to do some work at a diamond mine. And what they had to do was defer to the Aboriginals. It struck you that they had all the rights and they knew nothing about mining. Do you want to talk about that for a minute or two? That part of the story. Mm-hmm.
So that book was published in 2008, and actually Mount Royal knew that that book was just coming into print when I got hired at Mount Royal. So it wasn't something that Mount Royal was unaware of. Anyway, Albert Howard, who's the co-author of that book, and I were in the Northwest Territories in the 90s. And what happened is that Albert Howard was working for Aboriginal organizations, and I was working for the government. And I was supposed to be involved in the implementation of the government's traditional knowledge policy. And when I was going to these hearings on the diamond mine, I realized that traditional knowledge, the diamond mines they were not interested in traditional knowledge at all. They weren't concerned about it. They were just doing this as kind of an elaborate bribe to try to get the Aboriginal groups to go along with the diamond mine. But it had very serious implications, this attempts to integrate what was called traditional knowledge into all aspects of government policy, because traditional knowledge is a combination of what's called local knowledge and also the spiritual beliefs of Aboriginal groups. And so what happens is that those beliefs can be used to justify any activity. including the overexploitation of resources or any other kind of problematic initiative. And so I, as a private citizen, spoke out against this policy, and I was suspended because I had breached the duty of I think it's called the oath of loyalty or something like that. And so I thought, well, because I'm not able to tell the truth in the government,
Mm-hmm.
go into the university system to to tell the truth, which worked for about 20 years, and then in 2021 it was all over.
Everybody lost their mind. But this diamond mine story, that was in the what year was that? In the late 90s?
Yeah, so it was 1995, I guess. That's when it started. And then 1996 was when the article was written that was called Traditional Knowledge Threatens Environmental Assessment in the journal Policy Options.
So at this time, you started noticing a pattern, or you started noticing something that didn't make sense as to how we treated Aboriginals. I would say that it's pretty safe to say that you have a great affinity for the Aboriginal culture. You've studied it. I mean, what some people might describe, oh, that Frances, she's a racist and she's a hater. Isn't it quite the opposite?
Yeah, well, we're trying to solve problems. Like, that's what Albert and I were trying to do, is we were trying to understand why, with all the money that's going into Aboriginal communities, attempts to address these problems and these problems continuing, why was this happening? And we discovered that there's a large group of largely non-Aboriginal people, lawyers and consultants, that are siphoning money away from Aboriginal communities and making arguments that keep Aboriginal peoples in a state of dependency. So they're in constant need of the Aboriginal industry's assistance. And this is the kind of situation that's happening. So disrobing the Aboriginal industry is exposing how that unfolds and the kind of arguments that are used to basically not solve these problems, continue these problems, so that money can be extracted to, create more grievances, largely legal grievances. That's the nature of the industry, is that instead of solving the social problems, you get everyone into these legal grievances, which then, of course, require huge amounts of legal fees to be paid. And then in the end, nothing ever gets addressed. That's the actual roots of the problem. And we just fall into that.
I think you're totally right. I have to say I haven't thought very much about it, but nothing ever gets better. You still hear the reserves have no clean drinking water. Some reserves are nice. I used to know a Métis guy, and he said that he liked his reserve that where he came from, and it was nice. He had a nice home with a family, but you don't always hear that type of story. So it's like they keep the maybe Aboriginal or First Nations community in this constant state of a dire situation, and yet they're not getting any money. And who's getting the money? The chiefs?
Yeah.
Who's getting it? The chiefs, right? Maybe. Yeah. Okay.
And you need the services. Like, that's the key issue, is that the people who are suffering, the most marginalized members of Aboriginal communities, are in these isolated areas with very, very poor education, healthcare, housing, and so on. And there's no programs or services that are in place to improve things in these Aboriginal communities. The money just largely goes to the industry and to the privileged elements within these communities.
Yeah, this I think is another thing on purpose that we'll probably get into as we learn more. I mean, this has to do with what we talked about, what I played in that clip, UNDRIP, which a lot of regular people don't even know what that is. In a nutshell, how would you explain UNDRIP to your neighbor or your friend that, I work in a normal environment where people don't know really anything about what I ever talk about. So sorry.
Yeah, so this is quite a complex legal framework. But it was initially a United Nations document, which is supposedly nation to nation. So the United Nations were supporting Aboriginal groups as nations having the right to self-determination. And this was all symbolic. It started off as a symbolic entity. And I argued against it right off the bat, even as a symbolic gesture, because I don't think it's accurately describing Aboriginal groups, which are small, mostly small, isolated groups that have small populations. They're not nations like Quebec, where you would be able to form your own state. That's generally what nations are considered to be in the international system. Those groups that are aspiring for statehood and want to become their own state. Anyway, but that was bad enough, that this kind of false information that UNDRIP was kind of promoting. But then it got entrenched in legislation in British Columbia, especially. That's the only province that is entrenched it. But also the federal government did entrench it with after the Kamloops claim was made, because it sort of greased the machinery to accept all sorts of Aboriginal demands after the unmarked graves claim was made. Anyway, what it does is it has an ethnic principle that is put into a geographical system. So instead of having provinces where you have a geographical boundary, municipalities which have a geographical boundary, Canada which has a geographical boundary. So you're in a municipality, you no longer live there, you go live in another municipality, and everyone can come in and out of those municipalities depending upon their circumstances. What UNDRIP does is it entrenches an ethnic principle, which is an Aboriginal group whereby people who don't belong to that Aboriginal group can't enter into that group and become part of that political dynamic. And so now with UNDRIP, you have those Aboriginal entities that have decision-making power over non-Aboriginal entities who have no ability to hold those Aboriginal groups to account. And this is going to have massive implications for British Columbia especially, but it will also have implications for, federal crown lands. It largely involves crown lands, but as we saw from the Cowichan decision, they're also to some extent going to impact private lands as well. It's not very clear, but the principle is not consistent with liberal democratic principles, which are geographic. We're all part of British Columbia, or we're all part of Alberta. I moved to British Columbia and now I'm part of the British Columbia political system, but I cannot become part of the Nisga'a or the Tla'amin or all these other elements. Whereas the Tla'amin, people can go and live in Powell River if they want to, but people from Powell River cannot go and live in the Tla'amin kind of.
Meaning that you can go live in, if you're from a certain band, you can go live in Powell River. And am I understanding this right? And then become part of that band? No. Yes.
Part of Powell River. So
okay.
you will now vote in Powell River municipal elections, but there's no opportunity for a non-Tla'amin person to move from Powell River to the Tla'amin. Oh. So it's an ethnic-based, an ancestrally based, tribally based system, as opposed to a geographical principle. And those two things are not consistent with each other. But it's because it's using an international kind of language, which is state to state. So our relationship between the United States and Canada, for example, we can move to the United States and maybe become a citizen and so on, but we have no say over what goes on politically in the United States. We can't vote in their elections or anything like that. But what it's done is it's kind of taken that idea that you have the United States, or that now it's got its own little thing within Canada, but it's only the ethnic group that's associated with that can control anything that goes on there. So, and if I can just give an example of this, which is easier to understand, there's a group that has docks in a place called Pender Harbor. So this is in British Columbia. They're waterfront properties and they have these docks, and this is discussed in What Remains. And they want to now do changes to their docks, but their docks are on Crown land. And what UNDRIP has done is it's created a sort of a joint management body that includes the Aboriginal group and the provincial government. And in order for those residents to try to change their docks, they need approval from this Aboriginal group that is on this joint provincial Aboriginal group body. But those people in Pender Harbor have there's no accountability between them and this Aboriginal group that sits on this joint committee. So the lines of accountability have been severed in British Columbia, which is going to mean that people who are not part of an Aboriginal group are going to have no ability to influence how those decisions are made in the end, because it's not an accountable system, because it's not based upon a geographical principle. It's based upon an ethnic principle, which is based on ancestry, as opposed to, where you happen to live in the province of British Columbia at that time.
Holy smokes.
Yeah,
It is complicated, because you talked about ancestry, and it also, what I take this to mean is that if you live in Powell River, you have no say on that dock. If you're a resident, like if there's something that you oppose, you can't go to a town council and vote on it. It really, that the Aboriginal group in charge has carte blanche, or they have complete control. In a way,
they're in association with the provincial element. So typically, what would have been the case, it would have been a provincial government body that would be making decisions about provincial crown lands. So you are connected to that provincial entity because you vote in provincial elections. Now it is the provincial government has teamed up with this Aboriginal group. The Aboriginal group has veto power over whatever decisions are made. And so now you, as a resident of Pender Harbor, are not able to influence that Aboriginal group in any way. You have them asserting power over you, but you don't vote for them. You don't have any kind of connection to them. So they can pretty much make whatever demands that they want to make off you without any being held to account in any way. And this is an incredibly serious situation, which we've just gradually kind of come to accept, because it's been sold as a way to enhance reconciliation, which it will not. It is going to create terrible conflicts between the Aboriginal group and the non-Aboriginal residents. And even it could be an Aboriginal resident of Pender Harbor who just doesn't happen to belong to that Aboriginal band. So It's not even necessarily a complete Aboriginal thing. It's more those Aboriginal people who are seen as this national group that should have decision-making power over those that are not part of their national group.
Wow, that's like a niche group. And why would a government be so silly as to sign up for this? Because they are gone. They have just gone bananas. They are just sucking up to the UN in this way, and that is like, that's not democracy.
It's not. It's a complete destruction of democracy, and it's a very interesting question as to how this all has happened. And many people are making arguments about, the destruction of Canadian sovereignty, the destruction of British Columbia sovereignty, and the intrusion of international forces into Canada and British Columbia. This is something that needs to be investigated as to what's behind that. That has still not really been determined as to why this is happening. All we can say is that British Columbia sovereignty is seriously under threat because of this passing of this DRIPA, what's called DRIPA legislation, and that needs to be overturned. That people should fight now and fight hard against this, because it will go nowhere positive, and it will create terrible social conflicts in British Columbia society.
Yes, it will. And the problem is that if you speak up and out, well, maybe things are changing now, because a lot of people have had enough. We've had enough. Our real estate market here in BC was sort of taken over for, whereas normal people can't afford a down payment, right? Back in the day, if you collected $50,000 to put a down payment on an average house, well, you'd get outbid cash from foreign money. Oh, but God forbid you say anything about it because you're going to sound like a racist. But I, quite frankly, am sick of that. Like, I will say, I think I'm like you that way. I just take my lumps, but I'll say what people are thinking because I'm not scared. Well, I'm not like, it's stupid to tiptoe around it because then you lose your country. Then you lose your democracy. Then you lose your ability to buy a house. And you're right about BC because, I mean, there was that Richmond court ruling that made a lot of noise, right? And I'm not sure we all got clarity on it because there's nothing you can trust. You can't bloody trust global news, I'll tell you that much. But that the Cowichan First Nations claimed area in southeast Richmond, the Cowichan First Nation and several allied First Nations have won a major legal battle confirming that they hold legal rights to a part of their historic lands in Richmond, as well as the right to fish in a section of the Fraser River for food. In of itself, that doesn't sound terrible, but that brings into question who has autonomy over that portion in Richmond. Well, you were recently visited here, so you went to the airport area. That's Richmond. That's our kind of airport area. This piece of land, it had like quite a bit of industrial infrastructure on it and a tiny bit of residential. I think a tiny bit of, but mostly commercial. I think there was an Amazon warehouse and stuff like that. So some people said, well, it's not a big deal because it's not like it's a suburb too much with houses. It's more industrial. But doesn't that make a difference? Who has say over that? Like, wouldn't that not affect businesses wanting to come here, be like, well, I don't think I'm going to lease this property because you guys don't have the rights. It's the Aboriginals that have the rights, or whatever this First Nations, the Cowichan First Nation. Yeah. Does that make sense that it's bad for business? And what did you make of that when you heard about that ruling? I mean, is it a precedent setting ruling?
It is, yes. And the big thing about it is that historically it's always been about Crown land. So that's what it's been historically, which is bad enough because, of course, the tax base of British Columbia depends upon them, having stumpage fees and all these things off of Crown land. And so if an Aboriginal group takes that Crown land off into an indigenously controlled area and now gets access to the stumpage fees, that means that the tax base of British Columbia is going to shrink, while the money that's required for services is going to continue to be the same, plus providing services to the Aboriginal population. That's not going to go away either. So it's bad enough that it's Crown land, but at least it doesn't threaten the individual livelihoods of British Columbia citizens on an individual level. And there are businesses there. So what's going to happen is when you try to sell your business or try to sell your condo in that area, the value is going to plummet. Ugh. Because the next person who's going to buy that will not want to buy that for that high price because the title is now uncertain. So the title is now, an Aboriginal group has a stake in that and so on. And this has been happening in British Columbia and all across Canada now since all these legal arguments began to be made about Aboriginal title and oral histories and all these things. And it's a very difficult area because the law profession, especially the law schools, have been taken over by the Aboriginal industry. And so they make arguments that are expanding the jurisdiction of Aboriginal rights in terms of what that encompasses. That's what's happened. And the legal arguments in terms of from an academic standpoint are quite contested, but they've never really been able to have, full hearing because of all the accusations of racism and so on that have happened when people try to talk about this issue, which is Aboriginal. And just if I could just explain briefly.
Yes.
Aboriginal groups historically were tribal and subsistence oriented. They were not at a lower level of development, cultural development than European nation states. And so they did not have surveyed boundaries. They had fluid boundaries as one group went into one area and another group came and they fought over those boundaries. Now you have several groups claiming title to the same spot of land. And this is going to cause massive uncertainty in terms of who actually has title over that area. And of course, the Aboriginal industry loves this because this means it's going to go on for the next 100 years of all these groups arguing in court. And now we're going to have the fee simple landowners thrown into the mix as well. So that's what's happening in Pender Harbor, is that the residents now have hired lawyers to challenge the Aboriginal groups who have their lawyers. And then you have the government that has its lawyers. And you can see who's going to make all the money off of these initiatives. It's going to be the lawyers, and all the attempts to solve the Aboriginal problems of, poor health, terrible education, housing, which is falling apart, poor drinking water, that's never going to get resolved.
Oh my gosh.
So it's just a mess.
It's a mess.
Yeah.
But do you think that, I don't know, to play, because maybe an Aboriginal group maybe has title over a certain area, do you have faith that that group will make the right decisions and do the right thing for that area, for the prosperity of the area, and take into account the commercial property, the residential property? Like, I'm a business thinker. I think in terms of business, right? Like, think in terms of prosperity. So you're saying no, you're shaking your head no. You don't have faith that these groups will do the right thing.
No,
you can educate me, because they're not democratic.
They're democratic. So, like, everyone's going to say in response to this, well, the British Columbia government is, it's not exactly doing, appropriate things. It's acting in all these terrible ways, but it's democratically elected. So if you don't like what the British Columbia government is doing, then you have yourselves to blame, and that's the challenge, is to mobilize enough citizens to say, hey, we've had enough of this autocratic, government that's doing all these crazy woke things, and we need to get a more rational system in place. If the Aboriginal groups are in charge, you have no democratic control over that group, because it is based upon ancestry, not geography, which is the liberal democratic principle. And it's a fundamental incompatibility with liberal democracy that we have been sold this bill of goods, because we've been told that this is going to be helpful to Aboriginal people. This is going to improve their circumstances. It doesn't help them either, because it's the privileged tribal entity that grabs control over that system and benefits a very select group and leaves all the marginalized people who are not related to the people in power out in the cold. So it's not beneficial to anyone to have this in place, and it has to be fought against really hard, and it has to be fought against now, before the whole legal system has been taken over by this kind of very, very undemocratic ethnic principle.
Well, it's very stupid of our governments to sort of get down with this. They're the ones putting us in this position. We elect them so that hopefully they'll make good decisions. We all know that they don't do that now. And so if they're getting involved in this to their own demise of this province, we only have them to blame. But you're right. We can vote them in or out. It was our fault that we voted David Eby in, who's our activist premier over here. But what you're saying is there's no, I heard you, quite well about that that's not the same principle that's being applied. There's no democracy when they get in charge, yet we're letting it slip away. We are deferring to them. We are, we are kowtowing to this notion of sucking up to Aboriginals. Hey, we love everybody. It's not like sucking up, but now there's a time where we all have to be equal and move forward. And the other problem is you're speaking about this. So anybody that comes home from work and Googles me or whatever, watches me or whoever the other podcasters you've been on, they'll be informed. The problem with everything is we're relying on the news media to inform people and to report things properly. And you know how that goes. which brings me to where we should probably talk about now. You are good friends with Simon Hergott now because you made the documentary together, and he can tell you, how bad global news was to us. I mean, you cannot trust what they did. And okay. I don't even know where to start, but I'm going to play a clip of Paul Johnson's story from back in 2021. Maybe I'll play the clip first, but maybe 215, this number of 215, my children are supposed to go to school with the orange shirt and all of this. And my kids are, my son is like, he's 15 now, but he's like, I'm not wearing an orange shirt because you told me to. I'm not wearing a pink shirt. I don't get down with this shirt thing. He's not into it. But he says to me, he's got problems with land acknowledgements. He disagrees with me politically on a lot of things, but he doesn't agree with the land acknowledgement and a lot of things of it. He goes, it's so phony. It's so empty. Like, why are we saying this? But we don't teach anybody about Native culture and what have you. But anyway, I'm getting off topic, but the 215, somehow we got to 215, and it's become a famous number. And what do you think?
Yeah,
I know,
so this
like,
is the Kamloops announcement. So
yeah,
this is a very interesting situation, which was on May 27th, 2021. The Kamloops Indian Band put out a press release announcing that the remains of 215 children had been confirmed at the Kamloops Indian Residential School, and some of these children were as young as 3 years old. So that was the announcement. On July 15th, we heard that no, that wasn't the case from the GPR operator, Sarah Bollier, who said that it was not 215 remains had been found. It was 200, not 215, 200 targets of interest, which were these hits on the GPR, which, as we have come to know, can be anything. You don't see remains. It could be boulders, it could be cobbles, it could be animal burrows, etc. Anyway, you might be wondering why it's now 200 instead of 215. And that's because Sarah Bollier, because she did not do the proper job ahead of time, which is assessing the excavations that have been done on the site. She found out after the fact that 15 of those 215, where though she had 15 hits, was in an area that had been previously excavated by the Simon Fraser University Archaeology Department, and they had not found any remains there. So she had to downgrade her number from 215 to 200, which raises the question, if she was wrong on the 15, couldn't she also be wrong on the 200? And it turns out that a bunch of septic tiles were laid in the area where this survey was done, and they're in the same configuration as Sarah Bollier was claiming that the remains had been found. So we need excavations in that area. $12.1 million has been allocated to do these excavations. And the band said that they were going to exhume these remains. But of course, you need to find out whether there are remains there before you have any exhumations. They need to do those excavations, and people need to hold the band to account, because if we don't, it means that Aboriginal groups can just get money that they do whatever they want with and don't do what has actually been allocated. That money's been allocated for. Public funds were allocated to do these excavations, and it is now, 4 years after the fact, and this really needs a reckoning, and they need to be held to account. But because it's the federal government that's got to do it, how do you get that done? How do you get that? It's really pressure has to be put on the government to make the
There is no pressure on anybody to do any excavation. We just readily accept the 200, the 215. We accept whatever they say. All of that is in the documentary, What Remains. I'm gonna because I worked at Global News, I'm gonna play this report of what the media was saying on Global News. So, and they said this on CBC, they said this everywhere. So this is the general consensus out there, because when we Oh, okay. First, I'll play the clip. Then I'm going to come back and talk about it. So, everybody watching right now, this is a short clip. It's a minute and a half. This is Paul Johnson, and a reporter that I know, which I'll tell a little story when we come back. Let's watch how we portrayed what happened at the Kamloops Residential School in 2021.
Mass grave site. Farah, there's a portion of their property near the banks of the South Thompson River that they've got closed off. That's where the suspected mass grave site is. If this turns out to be what they think it is, this is going to be a staggering and heartbreaking moment in Canadian history.
The Kamloops Residential School was run by the Catholic Church. It operated from 1890 until 1977. Among the First Nations children from across BC's interior who were forcibly brought here, there were rumors of deaths and burials in unmarked graves. Now, the Kamloops First Nation says they found proof.
We do know that they've had members who shared the stories of, cousins and relations and siblings who have been missing. And, the common theme that they've all heard was that their sibling, their sister, their brother, their consultant had run away. With that find, we know that these children did not run away.
Kamloops Chief Roseanne Casimir says a search of the school property with ground-penetrating radar has revealed the presence of at least 215 bodies. From the imagery obtained, they suspect many are small children.
It was very horrifying to learn that we've found 215, remains of children, within our grounds. We were going through grief and loss here, knowing that these were children.
Who were the children? How did they die? What were their stories? All of that is unknown at this point.
Yeah. Okay. Can I say something about that story first? Okay. Well, then in Paul Johnson, I know it's making, have you seen, it's been a while since we've seen that, right? I'm sure you have lots to say. Paul Johnson, at least in his story, is saying suspected. He's saying we suspect. He's saying, he kind of wrote that story because he would write the script for that. He wrote that story in a way with, it was sensationalist, but he kept saying the word suspected. The banner on the bottom said bodies of 215. Any normal person watching that story is going to go, oh my God, 215. And then you have that Roseanne Casimir talking about, oh, they were told these children ran away. And I'm going to ask you about all of this, but I want to say something as a personal story for someone who had worked with Paul Johnson. I heard him when this was coming out. I hadn't been fired yet. And I heard him in the newsroom by the Global National pod, where the producer pod was. And he was talking to another anchor. He was talking to Nitu, this anchor. And they were talking. And it was the first I'd ever heard of this Kamloops and the children buried. And they were not talking to me. I was many meters away, eavesdropping a little bit like, is what? I was like, what? Like there's children, there's bodies, right? And they were talking all in their producer pod, and Paul and Nitu were standing up talking. And I, from across the room, went, did they find anything? And they just looked at me and they just kept talking like I didn't say anything. They just kept, and I will never, they just kept talking like I said nothing. You know what they should have said was, well, no, they didn't find anything, or no, they're still looking. But they just looked at me like I said nothing. And I said, did they find anything? And they just kept talking. It was almost like something from a movie, like a Twilight Zone. Like, we better keep talking. We better keep pushing this narrative. And there's another story I have about a COVID example where two anchors did the same thing. And I almost feel like they are talking like this in the newsroom to perpetuate this narrative that everyone else is going to follow. I think a little bit because news in the newsroom goes out like a contagion. We're a network. If the network tells us to do something or to air something, we go with that. If the government sends us a press release, we go with that. And so we went with the 215 without doing really. And we just send Paul Johnson up there. He'll talk a little bit and then file that story. And the amount of real journalism being done, I can say, is half-ass. What would you say?
Well, this is terrible. The media's coverage of this, it just beggars belief. It is absolutely terrible. And in terms of that clip from Casimir, it should be stressed, and this is a huge confusion that is going on in all of these discussions, is that not one parent has said that their child never came home from the Kamloops Indian Residential School. So we have no missing children's reports, nothing like that. What's being talked about often, and this is not the case with the Kamloops, Ben, because there's a cemetery on the reserve across from the Catholic Church, and you can go and look at it. And in that cemetery, there are a whole bunch of unmarked graves, like graves that were once marked, but the crosses, the wooden crosses, have deteriorated. So many of the children who died either on their home reserves or at the school, we actually have records of 49 children that their deaths are associated with the Kamloops Indian Residential School. 25 of those 49 did not die at the school. They died at their home communities, or died in accidents, or died in hospital. And I think 4 of those children are buried in the Kamloops Cemetery, and all of the other children are buried in other cemeteries. But if you went to the Kamloops Reserve Cemetery, you probably wouldn't find markers for those children because those markers have deteriorated. So there's a number of parents now, or relatives, who are saying, we really want to find out where our loved one is buried in a cemetery. Like, they don't know exactly where in the cemetery their child is, or child is a relative. But that's a whole different situation than saying children, well, as Roseanne Casimir is saying there. She's implying, or maybe she's directly stating, that there's all these children who no one heard from them again. The parents don't know where they are. They disappeared. And then we have these GPR things. So obviously they're in this apple orchard. Like, that's kind of what she's saying in that clip. That's not what's happened here. But because the media is so terrible, they're not going to ask any of those questions, which are, what are the names of the children that you're talking about? Because then we would actually have something to go and do an investigation with. But we don't have that, because it's just this kind of vague, a bunch of people have said that their children went missing. Well, that's not good enough. That's just rumor mills and, ghost stories and these kinds of things. And this confusion is constantly being made between the children buried in cemeteries in graves which are now unmarked. They were originally marked, versus clandestine burials. There is not one clandestine burial that has been identified for the entire area of British Columbia and Canada, for that matter. Like, there's no clandestine burials that have been identified. So we need to just understand that difference. But it's done deliberately. This confusion is deliberately perpetrated by the Aboriginal industry, which is trying to extract money in various ways and get other concessions of other lawsuits, other initiatives. And we need to face up to this and call this out.
But the story is that we're told the big bad Catholic priest took the children, and then the children, somehow they all died, and there they are buried. They were callous and cold enough to be buried there. I'm sure that probably bad things. Do you agree that probably bad things happen in residential schools? But do you think that that's overhyped? I mean, they were probably strict. There were probably strappings. There's probably not a lot of love. There's no reason that is this true that the government took all the Native children and put them in these schools and took away their sort of heritage? What is the real story behind the whole residential school thing?
Well, it's quite, it's a matter of intense public debate and academic debate. And it's not very clear, because you have like 100-year period with a whole bunch of different regions, a whole bunch of different religious organizations. It depends to some extent on the time period, and it also depends upon the school. You have schools where you would have very authoritarian personalities that would be in place. With respect to the Kamloops case, you have a CBC documentary that was produced in 1962 called The Eyes of Children, and people should watch that documentary. Now, maybe it was a, propaganda film or something like that. We know, but you can sort of see that, these nuns, they're childless women who, were very, loving towards these children, and like it's not like they were murdering them and throwing them in a mass grave outside. So that school in particular in 1962 seemed to be very concerned about the children and so on. But you would have other cases where you would have, probably, some malevolent individuals who might have acted improperly. From what I've heard about the British Columbia case, there's a task force that took place in the 1990s, and all the complaints that were made about sexual and physical abuse, there was no claims about unmarked graves at that time, interestingly enough, but it was against staff, like not priests and nuns, but cooks and janitors and so on. Those are the people who were actually had charges brought against them. So this all needs to be investigated scientifically, not through this industry advocacy lens, which is happening right now.
Yeah, I'm sure bad things happen. Bad things happen everywhere. Bad things happen in public school, right? There's everybody has a story, and I can only imagine bad things happened I'm not saying they're all saints. We can probably all accept that, right? But this okay. And when did the school close down? 1979? Something like that? I think so.
Early 70s. It got turned into a residence. So I believe it was 69 when the school itself was no longer a school, and then it became a residence and so on.
Okay.
But the thing is that there are instances of sexual abuse, of physical abuse.
I'm sure there is.
That was the norm. Like the strapping that's physical abuse now, but that at the time, that was seen as, spare the rod and spoil the child. That was the attitude.
It was a long time ago. My mom got strapped in school. My dad did, like her, their hands, it's not that I'm sure that happened. I'm sure nice things didn't happen. Some not nice things happened there at any school. I'm sure that
there was huge logistical problems in many of these schools, like trying to get enough supplies. There was disease, there's been documented, Peter Bryce's report in 1907. That was terrible ventilation systems and, substandard kind of buildings. These were all things that were going on. And in my view, one of the largest problems was, there's a lot of insensitivity to the difficulties Aboriginal people were experiencing. So there was kind of a harsh mentality that existed, especially in the early days of the schools. So there was a lot of problems which need to be, understood and figured out. But that's a totally different situation than this whole clandestine burials kind of arguments.
Absolutely.
There's no evidence for the clandestine burials at all at this stage, and that's not recognized by the Canadian public very well.
No, because of the bloody media. Because the media, all the government has to do is send a press release to the newsroom, and then they do a little. That's it. I remember reporters going to interview Aboriginal people who are adults who claim they went to the school and they didn't have a good time and things were sad and things like that. So yeah, I believe their testimony. If they didn't have a good time at school, lots of people didn't have a good time at school, and I think we can say on record, I'm sure bad things happen. But that, like you said, that is completely different than going around and saying there's 215 bodies buried in the apple orchard. If there's a pretty easy way of going to figure out how to get the final word on that. And anybody that doesn't want to see the final word on that, shame on them. You can say, well, we don't want to disturb the dead. Oh, so you'd rather just go with this, and they were
We
given
don't
the
know there's
money.
dead though. We do not know that there are dead to disturb. Like this is kind of in order to
Yes.
find out whether there are dead,
Yes.
we need to have, and you don't have to do a very large, you just go to where the septic tiles were laid,
Yeah.
do some excavations and see whether you get the tiles or whether there's something else there, these kinds of things. But it really, there needs to be pressure put on the band. And the worst thing is that the government just a couple months ago gave the band another $12.5 million.
So now they have like $25 million
so
total.
the government at that time should have said, hey, we'll give you the 12.5 additional million dollars after you do the excavations, which you're supposed to spend the initial $12.1 million on. But they didn't do that at all. It's just like they've just totally given up on, having any kind of oversight over the matter at all.
If somebody gave you and me a couple of million, 2 million, we'd go up there and sort that out in a week. I would have that sorted out in a week. There's no way you get $12 million and you come up with no answer. And in the document, and you're right, like ancestors or grandchildren, because it's been a long time now, somebody would say, my son was missing, my cousin was missing, and there's ways of finding out, well, did this kid run away or is this kid buried? I mean, the fact that the GPR, the ground penetrating radar, detected something which is now thought to be septic pieces or whatever, dig it up and give an answer. But to actually put in legislation that is in that documentary, What Remains, who is the woman? The one of the leaders is like, I'm making this illegal if you even dare question this.
This is Leah Gazan.
What's her name?
Leah Gazan, who's the
that
MP
woman.
for Winnipeg Center. And
Well,
she
was
said,
awful.
there's nothing more violent than questioning the stories of Aboriginal people. It's like, I'm sorry, we have all sorts of horrible historical instances of people being, massacred. That's obviously more violent than the fact that you're questioning the story of someone who claims that there was, these atrocities that happened at some residential school, which, you need evidence for this. Like we cannot just go by the testimonies of Aboriginal people. This is like, testimonies might be true, but they might also be false, as is the case for Billy Coombs, which people should be aware of, and that's in What Remains. Billy Coombs was a survivor of the Kamloops Indian Residential School, and he said that Queen Elizabeth II visited the Kamloops Indian Residential School in 1964 and abducted 10 children from that school, and those children were never heard from again. Now, it turns out that Queen Elizabeth II was not even in Kamloops in 1964, but even if she were in Kamloops, like for people who watch royal visits, they know that the Queen just can't go to somewhere and abduct a bunch of children. She's watched all the time by, many, many reporters who are trying to get some kind of coverage of the latest, bottle that she's bashing against a ship or whatever she's doing. So this is absurd to be making this argument. So if I'm questioning Billy Coombs, Leah Gazan thinks that that's the most violent thing that she's ever heard of. Leah Gazan is an absurd person who should not be taken seriously at all. But she's got some kind of, power where she's proposing to make what I'm saying illegal because she's a monomaniacal totalitarian personality. It's unbelievable.
The part in the documentary about her is great, so I recommend everybody watch it. But like, if she really cared, she'd be like, oh my God, we need to find out. Yes. We need to get on this right now. She wouldn't be saying, don't you question this. Don't you question this. Like, anybody that says don't question anything, these are people not to be trusted. So she seemed like an absolute lunatic. And you know what? There are some people, there's a big backlash against a lot of things. And there's a big backlash against the monarchy too, right? Like people do think. Yeah, that's probably, and maybe back then, people don't like the monarchy and the king and the queen, and they think they've all been up to no good too. So who knows? I mean, this Billy Coombs, I don't know. That's what he you think he's lying, I guess, or
Well,
what?
he's an alcohol. He was an alcoholic on the lower East, and that's the other part of the story which should be mentioned. And his name keeps on coming up again and again. His name is Kevin Annett, and he was a United Church minister in Port Alberni, and he's a bit of a, sees himself as a bit of a Jesus figure. And he started making all sorts of accusations of the United Church. And then he goes to the Lower East Side and he hooks up with Billy Coombs and a bunch of other alcoholics and starts talking to them about all these, murders and all these things. And this is the thing about, people's memories when you're sort of psychologically disturbed and you're not able to be objective. You absorb these kinds of suggestions that are given to you. And Kevin Annett has been doing this since like the 90s. And so Billy Coombs is listening to Kevin Annett and absorbs these stories. All these Aboriginal communities are watching Kevin Annett's film Unrepentant, which has all sorts of lurid stories about murders and everything. And so this has all been, kind of become part of the Aboriginal kind of storytelling kind of history. And this is not valid. Like, this needs corroboration. You need to corroborate it. You can't just accept stories that are told because they could be just misremembered types of things implanted by people like Kevin Annett.
Well, Frances, I'm pretty sure you're a racist for saying that. Okay, no, I'm joking.
Well, Kevin Annett is
I'm joking. That brings me to this clip of this lady in the movie. Oh my God, we got to show people this. Here we go.
Discourse in society. Frances would love to have a conversation with you.
As if. Are you not interested in what my arguments are?
I know what they are.
Okay, so what are my arguments?
I don't need to speak your work back to you. I'm not in a lecture. I'm not your student. I won't be summarizing your work for you.
No, but do you want to be accurate in the way you're portraying my work? Do you think that being accurate?
You think your work isn't racist?
But you think it is?
Yes.
So why do you think it's racist?
It fully is racist.
But what if you're going to say that my work is racist? Don't you think that you have a responsibility to say why you think it's racist?
Not to you.
Sorry, it's not
hilarious because I just saw something exactly like this. For people who follow my YouTube stuff, I just did a video the other day about this woman who is in charge of the University of British Columbia's First Nations House of Learning. Her name is Jolie Viveros. And Jonathan Kay, who's the editor of Quillette, and her got into this tangle on Twitter. And I just could not believe the unhinged character of this woman. And exactly the same thing happened where she's accusing Jonathan Kay of racism and white supremacism and all this stuff. And she's asked, could you please, specify what it is that Jonathan Kay has said that you believe is racist? And she said, it's just all throughout everything that he said. Like that's just like, go and take a look at what he said. And that's enough. She doesn't have to specify this or show why this is racist. And this is a common kind of thing that goes on. And again, people should not stand for this. You just need to keep on hammering at people who are making these accusations. Just say, look, that's not good enough. If you're going to accuse someone of have these defamatory claims, which is what they are, you need to be held to account for the accusations that you're making. And I think people have just about had enough of this tactic.
Absolutely. And you told me when we met before, when we did that quick little video, you said that the truth cannot be racist. The truth cannot be racist. And I think what's going on here is that whoever's doing this to us and making these very poor decisions, they're not made because these people are stupid. The government knows what's going on. These decisions are deliberate. Like, this is what I saw all through COVID, is that they force you to do things and you don't question it, and there is an agenda, and whoever actually controls this agenda is playing the long game. That's what I think is going on. And I think that I think that in this day and age, I don't know. I was going to say that when I was growing up, there was a bit of racism, and then it got better in the 90s and in the 2000s. We loved gay people. We loved Indians, Chinese, Koreans, like everybody, nobody was really going, oh, they're different race, I'm not going to hire them. People didn't look at people like that. There was a time where we just sort of didn't like see race. But now, because everything gets shoved in your face, then it breeds resentment. If all this LGBTQ stuff gets so shoved in our face that we kind of push back, and then people call you anti-gay, anti-this, anti-that. And I would say that you're not somebody that's anti-First Nations. I think you have spent your life trying to educate about First Nations and what goes on. Like, I don't think that you want to see 215 children buried. Do these people want that to be true? Do they think that you want that to be true? You don't want that. The thing is, you want the truth. And what they're doing is, I think they're using Natives to as guilt pawns to bring in UNDRIP. I think that's what's going on here.
Well, there's definitely, political pressure for various things. And a lot of people attach whatever their political agenda to, it's usually using compassion to do it. So
yeah,
say, if you're a kind person, then you'll go along with this. And if you oppose it, you're obviously this horrible, nasty person who wants to, oppress Aboriginal people and so on. We have to start, I don't really know what's going on as to why all this is happening. We need to sort of start to try to get the facts on the ground about it. So what facts do we know about all of these things that are happening? We know that Canadian sovereignty and British Columbia sovereignty are being weakened by initiatives like UNDRIP. But what is the forces behind that? Like, what is driving that? Like, that's not all that clear right now. At least I haven't studied it, so I don't know, but it's something to be documented as to what
you're getting a sense
moving into the Aboriginal. So the Aboriginal groups now are getting control of all these areas. The industry is obviously benefiting from this. But what, is it, the Chinese, are they setting up corporations in Aboriginal communities? Who's benefiting from this? Like, this is something that needs to be investigated.
It's such a good question. I don't know, because everything seems crazy. The COVID thing is crazy. Well, we can see who's benefiting financially, but whoever pulled those strings of the elites, whatever this fifth column is, I don't know. But somebody's got people, because if you have a logical brain and you have a business sense and you care about your country, you don't want to see your country not be economically viable. You want the best for your country. So have these stupid things we're doing, like what you're talking about. Oh my gosh, I've talked to you for so long. I didn't even talk about the fact that the Powell River, they want to change their name. That's in the documentary. But somebody is doing something. And, I want people to know that it is not racist to question. You're not sexist to question things. You are looking for the truth, and we're looking for the truth. And if you haven't figured it out by now, try and catch up. That think something's wrong, like something is wrong here. So we can't go around. That doesn't mean if you want to wear an orange shirt, wear an orange shirt. There has to be some accountability. And I can't let you go without asking you quickly about this thing. It's like, why have time? But like the viral video, the interview you did with this young girl, Jordan. Now that went all over the place. Like, people saw that.
Yep.
That was terrible. But that was the CBC. For folks that didn't know, Frances did an interview with this CBC journalist who really tried to take Frances out, but had no facts. She's like, there's 6,000. Well, my sources say, and then you weren't even yelling or doing anything. And she's like, don't raise your voice.
That was the strangest interview I've ever had by a long shot. Obviously this person wasn't the the most significant person at CBC. But the point is that CBC used to be a reputable news organization, and they would have some oversight about the people that were working for them. But this woman, and probably it was the culture of the CBC too, which has been terrible on the whole, examination of the unmarked graves, and, Grave Error, which is the book that Jordan Tucker was interviewing me about, because I was going to Quesnel to, talk to the city council about their denouncing of this book. Jordan Tucker hadn't even read this book, was just there to accost me about it. And then in the whole, unfolding of this interview, she was so antagonistic towards me that I just, took it to her, because I was just completely gobsmacked that there could be any interview that would be taking this kind of approach, which was basically a completely ideologically, laden kind of perspective. But I think, although Jordan Tucker, she's not a main figure in CBC, but her thought process to me was really interesting, which I think a lot of people who are supportive of this kind of idea would have similar ideas to hers. So I think it's very valuable to listen to, just to kind of see how she was thinking about that, which is, why would all these people be saying that this is true if it's not true? Like, that's kind of the approach that she's taking. When a journalist, you cannot be doing that.
Not at all.
If you work any kind of critical thinking, you cannot accept that, popularity is the same thing as validity. You have to look at every claim in terms of the evidence that is presented to support it. So I think it's a real lesson for people to sort of understand the kind of not very clear thinking that is going on with respect to this issue.
She was told something and she thinks it. So that was it. And that's all they say at CBC. And I don't know, was she doing that for radio or it was for radio? It was for radio.
No, I saw it on television. So
so
it was on TV, and I have the actual, it's in the description on my YouTube channel.
It's on your YouTube channel. People should
really
go and
watch
actually
it. Click on the story that was done. It's audio, the story because I was just using my audio recorder to record the television, but it's absurd what they clipped out of that too. They didn't look at all at any of my arguments about grave error or anything.
I would love to see that part, the part that aired, because I didn't see that. I just saw the whole.
It's in the description. So on my YouTube channel, where I have the interview, in the description is the actual audio of the story that aired.
Oh, fantastic. I would love to see that, because at the CBC, they would have contracted her to go do the story, because I don't think she was a CBC employee, but they have like 5 producers to do one thing. You at least think there'd be one producer to give her a bit of guidance or some briefing notes.
Yeah.
They have more money. They had more money than Global, right? Like, so that was an appalling interview, but a very good example of how people are thinking, of what people are thinking. And unfortunately, this is the mainstream. But I feel a change coming. I really do feel a change. Yeah,
I do too. That things are moving. Things have moved more in the last 2 months than I've seen in the last 5 years.
People don't feel the same about the Middle East. They don't feel the same about jabs. They don't feel the same about the government. They don't feel the same about anything. And your instincts are right, to everybody who's watching right now. Is there anything else that you wanted to touch on, or anything where you want to point people to go?
So my YouTube channel, Frances Widdowson 1600. I did a really great interview as well. We never got to the trans activism issue, which is another crazy subject. But I did an interview with Mia Hughes in Ottawa in June, and that's on there as well, called Be a Proud Transphobe.
Oh, good. Okay, good.
Which is about the craziness behind the trans activism stuff. Yeah. And that's breaking now too a bit. So there's hope on the horizon, but all you can do is try and tell the truth, not take it personally, and, just keep on, constant pressure. And then, you can't hope for a result, because then that's depressing, because, it just never, there just seems to be a lot of, you're swimming uphill. So, but still, I'm quite encouraged by, the change I've seen anyway, in terms of reactions to what I've been doing. So we'll
Yeah.
see if it continues.
We'll see if it continues. And before I maybe we'll just put a little quick comment up. I know we're wrapping up, but this person says at the Pioneer Cemetery here in Saskatoon, there's unmarked graves. They're so old. I guess this is a thing. Like, they didn't mark the graves. Like,
yeah, it's usually paupers' graves. So you only had the ability to buy a stone headstone if you had money, and everyone else put wooden crosses on their graves. And of course, Aboriginal people don't, it's not part of their tradition to tend graves like many European traditions are, where people go visit the grave and put flowers on them and things like that. So, in the Aboriginal tradition, they just, return to the meadow and so on. Some more wealthy, prominent individuals, have learned from European traditions and put headstones and stuff. But before contact, there were no marked graves. That wasn't part of it. So, this is
we learned. I didn't know that.
Yep.
I didn't know that either. What bothers me is that teachers across Canada are teaching the Indigenous genocide as truth without confirmation. Well, we've been taught a lot about genocide without maybe confirmation. And we are only taught about the Holocaust, but I was never taught in school about Stalinist Russia, communist China. I wasn't really taught about Pol Pot in Cambodia. I've come to learn those things after, but we're only taught one thing. So it's the indoctrination system. It's not even the,
Well, that's an interesting subject in its own right, because it's highly contested what the proper definition of genocide should be. So it's going to depend upon how people define genocide. And of course, it's a very political exercise, because, all the countries that got together in the United Nations to decide what the definition was going to be didn't want to have political acts of mass murder be genocide. So that's not, if you kill all your enemies who have a particular political ideology, that's not genocide. But if you kill a large group of people because of their ethnicity, that is genocide. Now, whether that's valid or not, this is another question. But, these things are all part of some kind of political kind of dynamic that's going on.
Yeah. Frances, thank you so much for your time today. I really, really enjoyed talking to you. And I think the audience will really enjoy this conversation also. And we can always do it again. There's plenty more to talk about. So thank you so much for joining me, and have a great evening. Okay.
It was my pleasure.
Oh,
thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye. And thank you guys for watching. There's quite a few people watching. I haven't done a live in a long time, but I'm glad that the people tuning in, you're hip to things, you know what's going on. Please believe, there is an agenda more than anything that I can tell you about. Like, I want to just tell this one story. So earlier in this conversation, I talked about how I saw Paul Johnson and Nitu talking about the graves and this story when the story was breaking, right? And sorry, I've spent my whole time looking down. I should be looking up. And when I remember when COVID was going on, there was these two anchors. Well, should I name Chris and Sophie? I was doing their 6 o'clock news because I had been directing that quite a bit. And I'm on headset and I can hear them, whatever they say. And in the commercial break, they were just talking. They were talking to one another. And the only people that could hear was the crew. And they were saying, it was so easy to get the jab. Yeah, everybody should just go out and get it. Yeah, like, what's the big deal? Literally, that's how they were saying it. That's the tone of how they were saying it. And then Chris was like, yeah, it's so easy. And then Sophie was like, yeah, why wouldn't you just get it? And maybe they were doing a bit or having a bit of fun, but that's what they were saying. And I was listening and I was like, there's no way in hell I would ever take this. I just kept that silent to myself because we were in commercial break, but it did not go unnoticed how much they were saying that. And in a way, when the whole crew is listening, when the whole crew is on headset and those two anchors are saying something like that, they are perpetuating a narrative of what is good. Okay, they're perpetuating what is the right narrative. If you hear them talk about that, you're really not going to speak against that when they're colloquially just saying that, just in passing. But I'm wondering if they're doing that as sort of mini indoctrination or something, so that if anyone was going to speak out, they wouldn't speak out. And I remember talking to another anchor, Colleen Christie. Sorry, I'm just going to name her. And I was like, when we were mixing, matching vaccines, I was like, why are they mixing and matching these things? They tell you to take an AstraZeneca and then they tell you to take a Pfizer or Moderna, mixing, matching, like it's a bloody Sleep Country mattress or something like that. And I was like, this can't be a good idea. And I said to her, do you think that this is a good idea to mix and match these things that you don't even know what the outcome is going to be? And she goes, take the first one. Take the first one you can get. Take the first one you can get. And I was like, whoa, that is psychotic. And so when she says, take the first one you can get, that signals to everybody, shut the hell up. Don't say anything. Don't, like, that's right. Somebody said they're 100% pure blood. Right on. Right on. Yeah, me too. Me too. God forbid we're in a situation where we need to get donated blood. I don't want it. But I think what I'm trying to say is just the putting those drops out there, or putting that conversation out there, that it's almost bullying, almost, you don't question. This is the narrative and this is what we're going with. And if you don't like it, get the hell out. And the guy who made the documentary, Simon Hergott, he was also fired for speaking up and out. Some snitch lady called our newsroom and Doug Sedora fired him. These are all names I'm going to start naming. Doug Sedora, Marcia Gabriel, Chris Galis, Sophie Louie, Paul Johnson, Nitu Garcha, Jordan Armstrong, Colleen Christie. You were all, David Aiken, all people I worked with, Donna Friesen, all your producers, Michael Henniger, Bhupinder Hundal. You were all complicit in the COVID narrative that caused people to get sick. Okay. And you are all complicit in this 215 number that is not verified, and there's no evidence. So if you really care about the news and real journalism, you would send people back up to Kamloops and lobby for the team to take the $25 million that has been given to taxpayer money to go and dig. Go and dig and see what's in there. Then report back and stop with all this Aboriginal pandering, which is not to say we don't love Aboriginal people, because we do. My brother's bass player is Aboriginal. My youngest son's best friend is Aboriginal. Welcome in my home anytime. I love these people. So don't give me this racist shit. This is about discovering what the truth is. And I hope to God one day we get smart enough to find it and Canada wakes up. Okay? I know everybody watching is awake. And God bless you all. Okay. Thank you for joining me today. I had a great time interviewing Frances. If you like my channel, please subscribe, and have a great evening. We'll see you another time. Peace out.